Hey, what do you say? And we're back. Happy Tuesday evening. Thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today in lunch. If there's something you want to talk about in lunch, by all means, that's a great forum to do it. Um, I appreciated your opinions. I appreciated those of you who spoke out. Um, just a reminder for those who didn't agree or didn't feel that they wanted to voice an opinion that might be different. It's okay. When you're comfortable, go ahead. All right. Speaking of not being afraid to say what you want or to get things done. Let's look today at some decolonization movements and some pretty important figures in decolonization. One, the gentleman right here, Mr. Gandhi, and then a little later on, a gentleman named Ho Chi Minh. All right, so here we go. The decolonization of India. Let me move this mug out of the way. There you go. Okay. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. In World War One weakened the British Empire. We know this. And after World War One, India, and I'm sure other countries too, had calls for independence. We know Ireland did. We know others did. And this led to the creation of this Indian National Congress. So calls for independence begin, in the early stages of the 20th century, after a few hundred years of occupation. In 1906, the Muslim League was created to protect minority Muslim rights against the Hindu-dominated Indian National Congress. So we see that we have two factions, we have two groups, and these two groups are going to try to figure out how to move India forward as an independent country when that time comes, and how to handle the distribution of power and rights and things of that sort. Hindus and Muslims belong to two different religions, philosophies, social customs, and literature. It is quite clear that Hindus and Muslims derive their inspiration from different sources of history. They have different epics, they have different heroes, different episodes in their histories. To yoke together, to tie together two such nations under a single state, one as a numerical minority, the other as a majority, must lead to growing discontent and final destruction of any fabric that may be so built up for the government of such a state. And this is from Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And we'll hear more about him in a little bit. So there's this underlying realization, or not even underlying, this realization that these are two distinct cultures, two distinct nations, distinct peoples, and the prospect of living under one government is challenging, to say the least. In 1919, Britain promised India self-rule, and the Government of India Act transferred powers over farming, public works, and education to Indians, to people there. Britain promised home rule to a couple of places I can think of after World War One. And before World War One, actually, they promised Ireland, home rule for a number of years. Despite British promises and the desire for self-determination, again, because of Wilson's 14 points, calls for self-rule were ignored. So those things that the Indian peoples wanted, the education and the public works and things of that sort, Britain said no. Britain was good at saying no to home rule. In 1919, anti-British protests sweep across India. In the Amritsar massacre, British troops killed 400 Indian demonstrators. I think quite possible that I could have dispersed the crowd without firing, but they would have come back again and laughed, and I would have made what I consider a fool of myself. There you go. Ego's a funny thing. Enter Mahatma Gandhi. Demands for independence were led by Mohandas Gandhi, a Hindu lawyer who had organized resistance movements in South Africa. Hindu lawyer, educated in England, working for a British law firm in South Africa. And in the film, gosh, we should watch Gandhi. It would take a couple of lunches, many lunches, but maybe Gandhi. So many movies to watch. All right. Gandhi advocated nonviolent in order to obtain moral high ground, civil disobedience. Ahimsa is sort of that nonviolent way of doing things. Civil disobedience is breaking unjust laws. You're being disobedient, but you're not being criminal, so to speak. You're not being violent. You're not being things of that sort. It was nonviolent. It was, in a funny way, very turn the other cheek, which is something you think the British would understand. God is truth. The way to truth lies through ahimsa, nonviolence. Like I said, see? All right, by the way, ahimsa, that word right here? Hold on. Gotta circle it. Ahimsa? It's a U2 song. All right, anyway. I digress. All right. Moving on. Let's see where that circle goes. An eye for an eye ends up making the whole world blind. I think we all know that quote. I am prepared to die, but there is no cause for which I am prepared to kill. And nonviolence requires a double faith. Faith in God and also faith in man. And that's very interesting. So his whole view is he's ready. Nonviolence is the greatest force at the disposal of mankind. It is mightier than the mightiest weapon of destruction devised by the ingenuity of man. And what are your thoughts on that? Hold on, I gotta get rid of that. It's gonna drive me crazy. Eraser. Erase. Oh, there's the circle. Okay. All right. So, from 20 to 22, Gandhi launched the non-cooperation movement, boycotting British goods, boycotting British institutions. Does any of this sound familiar with respect to other movements that you're going to hear about later or you have heard about in the past? It might. All right. Non-cooperation with evil is as much a duty as cooperation with good. All right. With homespun movement, Gandhi encouraged Indians to boycott British textiles and make their own clothes. And now the Indians began to spin their own cotton, make their own thread, and make their own clothing. They also do this, I believe, in the next slides. Okay. They burned. Foreign clothing shall take place at the Maiden. Okay. All requested to attend in Swadesi clothing. Gandhi dressed simply, despite wealth, showing sympathy for the poor. The spinning wheels symbolize Gandhi's ideals. Gandhi led a 230-mile march to the sea, protesting monopoly on salt. This was the Salt March. Suppose the people rise in revolt. They cannot attack the abstract constitution or lead an army against proclamations and statutes. Civil disobedience has to be directed against the salt tax or the land tax or some other particular point. Not that it is our final end, but for the time being, it is our aim. We must shoot straight. So that makes sense. You're not going to be able to take down the British all at once. But you can pick your targets and you can go after things that you can affect immediately. Gandhi was imprisoned several times. He used hunger strikes to draw attention to his cause and to force British reform. The hunger strike is a well-used tactic of the protester, the revolutionary. He embraced the Western notion of democracy and nationalism, but he rejected industrialization as immoral, which I find interesting, but which, again, I guess makes sense when you think about, well, let me ask you, and I won't answer it. In his whole approach to this endeavor, in the decisions he makes with respect to action, the decision he makes with respect to dress, with respect to all these things, how do those play a part in him feeling that way about industrialization? Or is it something you think that's completely different? There. The spirit of democracy is not a mechanical thing to be adjusted by abolition of forms. It requires a change of heart. What do I think of Western civilization? I think it would be a very good idea. All right. Gandhi opposed the caste system. He urged equal rights for women, hoped for equality and cooperation among Hindus and Muslims. And then the crash course on Gandhi. World War II further weakens. So he goes at this for a while. World War II further weakens British the Empire. Jawaharlal Nehru, Gandhi's successor, called for independent industrial India, which is not quite what Gandhi wants, but whoops, he is going to be the successor. So we'll see what happens. Muhammad Al Jinnah, leader of the Muslim League, rejects Nehru's plan and called for separate states for Hindus and Muslims. So as World War II ends and as this conversation of independence really takes hold, there is a realization that power is not going to be able to be shared equally and that maybe they're better off as two independent states. Any idea of united India could never have worked, and in my judgment, it would have led us to terrific disaster. Maybe that view is correct, maybe it is not. That remains to be seen. Muslims should have a state in which we could live and breathe as free men, in which we could develop according to our own lights and culture, and where principles of Islamic social justice could find free play. So, again, this is where these cultures are too diverse, it seems, and there's too distinct a difference for them to be able to cohabitate in a particular country. And again, this just kind of shows you the percentage of the population that is Hindu to the left. The darker the red, the more Hindu. The darker the green, the more Muslim. With the exception of one really major area, there are Muslims throughout India. So, it's sort of like in lots of states where there are two larger nations, like how do you reconcile land? How do you reconcile who gets the fertile land, who doesn't? How do you reconcile proportion of land? Do you base it solely on population? So these are all difficult questions. And maybe it makes sense to have two countries. I don't know. I mean, when you look at where the heaviest concentration of Muslims are, it seems only natural that they live there. In 1946, Jinnah called for a day of direct action. He demanded separate states, leading to violence. 6,000 were killed in the Great Calcutta Killing. The Calcutta disturbances broke out in a transitional period marked by power vacuum and systemic breakdown. Basically, there was something going on, and it just led to this taking place. It just got out of hand. This is India. In 1947, Britain gave India its independence, but partitioned the subcontinent into India for Hindus and Pakistan for Muslims. And you have West Pakistan, and then you have East Pakistan, which becomes Bangladesh in 1971. Muslims and Hindus were irreconcilably opposed monolithic religious communities, and as such, no settlement could be imposed that did not satisfy the aspirations of the former. So basically, there was just no way to do this. That's just what it boils down to. There just seems to have been no way to live peaceably. All right. The partition forced 12 million Hindus and Muslims to migrate against terrible violence. Basically, you have Hindus leaving the area that is Pakistan. You have Muslims leaving the area to Pakistan, on trains, and as you can see, 500,000 people were killed in violence as they left. And this just shows you where the skirmishes were and where the migration took place. Again, there are numerous eyewitness accounts of the maiming and mutilation of victims. The catalog of horrors includes the disembowelment of pregnant women, the slamming of babies' heads against brick walls, the cutting off of victims' limbs, anyway. Although some scholars question the use of the term genocide with respect to the partition massacres, much of the violence manifested as having genocidal tendencies. It was designed to cleanse an existing generation, as well as prevent its future reproduction. Interesting. Gandhi was assassinated by a fellow Hindu who rejected his views of Hindu-Muslim unity in 1948. Are you strong enough to fight without violence? I was, and I beat the strongest empire in the world. And then this is Pakistan and India remain bitter enemies today. Both nations claim the state of Kashmir, which is up here, which is controlled by India, but has a Muslim majority. That always ends well. And then this is just talking about, let's see. I've been running the Saichen Hotel in the town of Kargil for the past 17 years. It was inaugurated in 1986. Business this year, 2002, has been the worst ever because of the border tensions between India and Pakistan. They have called armies up against each other. They have done trainings against, they have done like military exercises as a show of force. They have fired shots. It has been a hot border from time to time. Yeah. Greetings from the Nehrus. India, the world's most populous democracy. And for the first 40 years of it, there's the world's democracies right there. And there's a chart in the AP Human Geography book that says that democracies are actually shrinking. And we could talk about that. I'm talking about anything, really. But they're the largest democracy in the world from a population standpoint. And this family is going to rule India for the first 40 years of its existence. Nehru, the prime minister, from 47 to 64. Indira Gandhi, the prime minister, from 66 to 84. And then Rajiv Gandhi, the prime minister, from 84 to 89. Indira Gandhi, Nehru's daughter, was prime minister. She was assassinated by her Sikh bodyguards for her policies in Punjab. Again, even within Hindu faiths, even within lots of faiths, there are regionalities that cannot be overcome by the common fact that they're Indian. The Punjab region is different than the other regions in India. And how she dealt with them obviously was not viewed favorably by this Sikh bodyguard or bodyguards, and she was assassinated. Political instability continued when her son Rajiv, the next prime minister, was assassinated in 1991. During the Cold War, India was not aligned. It didn't side with either one of them. And the reason they did that was they were keeping their options open. If I don't pick a side, I can work both sides. I can get stuff from both sides. I can sell to both sides. If I'm trying to get my country, on its feet and moving forward, it'd be nice to have both of these people, these powers, willing to work with me. The preservation of peace forms the central aim of India's policy, and we've chosen the path of non-alignment. Non-alignment does not mean passivity of mind or action, lack of faith or conviction. It does not mean submission to what we consider evil. We believe that each country has not only the right to freedom, but also to decide its own policy. We believe in non-aggression and non-interference by one country in the affairs of another, and the growth of tolerance. We therefore endeavor to maintain friendly relations. All right, basically, not our business, not our fight. And India is decolonized. Southeast Asia. Here we go. Decolonization in Southeast Asia. All right, here are the dates of colonial powers no longer being colonial. I see Afghanistan goes back to 1919, Cyprus 1960, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Israel, Palestine 48. Yeah, that went well. Philippines in 46, Taiwan in 45. We talked a little bit about Taiwan today. All right, and then there's Vietnam, South Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. That was all part of French Indochina. On my desk is a globe that's circa 1948, I think, and it has that part of the world as French Indochina still. It's really cool, and Africa looks a lot different too. So Southeast Asian nations gained their independence in the decades after World War II. Most imperialized, colonized Asian and African countries gained their independence after World War II. All right. Burma in 1947, Sri Lanka, which is right. Er, Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka. It's not on the map. It should be right around here. All right, anyway. In 1948, Malaysia, down here in yellow. In 1963, gained their independence from Britain. Again, once Britain starts letting them go, they start letting them all go. It's just very costly to keep a colony, and it's really difficult after 2 wars in 30 years to keep a colony. All right, moving on. Myanmar, formerly called Burma, remained poor with ethnic tension led by a repressive military. This is still present today. Aung San Suu Kyi led opposition party against the military rule. She spent 15 years in prison for speaking out against the government. It's not power that corrupts, but fear. Fear of losing power corrupts those who wield it, and fear of the scourge of power corrupts those who are subject to it. Fear, interesting. Oh my gosh, the things we could do with that. All right. Suu Kyi's party took control of the government. She won the Nobel Peace Prize, and military rule ended. This was in 2015. So she is able to gain back some. Well, she is able to, basically get the army out of government, which is never a bad thing. Okay, that's great. The Philippines and Indonesia. Remember, there's Myanmar, there's Malaysia, there's Indonesia, there's the Philippines. The Philippines gained independence from the United States in 1946, and Indonesia broke free from the Dutch in 1949, which would lead you to think that perhaps there were some fisticuffs involved. The Philippines became independent, but we didn't turn our backs on the Philippines. We still had a use for the Philippines. Here's the man. In 1954, the Vietnamese, led by Ho Chi Minh, defeated the French at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, and that earned its independence. Remember, Vietnam was French Indochina. The French were there. If you remember back to that video way back when about what's a continent, CPG Gray said that the French were the kings of not letting go. They tried, even after World War II, to keep their colonies, and they are violently removed from Vietnam, and they are violently moved from Algiers, and we'll get to that tomorrow when we go to Africa. And then this is a letter to a telegram to the President of the United States on behalf of the Vietnam government. People, I beg to inform you that in course of conversations between Vietnam government and French representatives, the latter require the secession of Cochinchina and the return of French troops in Hanoi. Stop. Meanwhile, French population and troops are making active preparations for a coup demand in Hanoi and for military aggression. Stop. I therefore must earnestly appeal to you personally and to the American people to interfere urgently in support of our independence and help making the negotiations more in keeping with the principles of the Atlantic and San Francisco charters. Respectfully. In other words, Ho Chi Minh is saying, look, we're in charge and the French don't like it, and they're going to take over. And, notice when this is written. This is written in 1946. Okay, World War II has ended. This is the second war where the end result of the war is the idea of self-determination, the idea of no colonies, of less imperialism. And France is going back to take back territory that was theirs. And all he's saying is, look, we have set up this government. We've set up this country. If you mean what you say, with respect, the San Francisco Charter is referring to the UN. If you mean what you say, then send help. Ho Chi Minh's communist forces controlled North Vietnam, and the French and U.S. supported the democratic government in the South. It was patriotism, not communism, that inspired me. I only follow one party, the Vietnamese Party. Vietnam became the center of a great Cold War tensions culminating in the Vietnam War from 1955 to 1973. The first part of those years, we were sending advisors and we were training the South Vietnam, the Viet Minh. We were not sending troops. Troops didn't really arrive in earnest with any real force until like 64. Yeah, like I said, the last good Mel Gibson movie, deals with that battle and in the I think it's the Ai Drang Valley. But it was the very first sort of cavalry, which was all helicopters in Vietnam, assault with American troops in the Vietnam War. It was 1964. Remember, the storm was a good opportunity for the pine and the cypress to show their strength and their stability. All right, in 1964, the Vietnam War began, more or less, when North Vietnamese boats allegedly fired on the warship in the Gulf of Tonkin. And this is another proxy war. So this is another idea where one of the two Cold War groups is fighting a non-Cold War group, and there you go. All right. U.S. fought Viet Minh, those are communists in the north, and Viet Cong, communists in the south, hoping to prevent a communist takeover of Vietnam, and this is because of that whole domino theory thing. In 1966, the United States dramatically increased its efforts in Vietnam as the Chinese begin to sort of indirectly, sneaky, supporting Vietnam. The Vietnam lacked territorial goals. It lacked a clear enemy, and by that, what they mean is like these weren't all troops wearing uniforms, so you could tell it's us and them. There were civilians and a lot of guerrilla warfare and people who were fighting for their independence who weren't necessarily in uniform. So you didn't know who in the village was an enemy, which is what led to a lot of the behaviors of just torching villages because they didn't know who the enemy was. And, irrespective of how you feel about that, if you can somehow imagine, the soldier constantly having to wonder if the person standing next to them is loaded with explosive or is going to kill them, and that constant tension had to eat on them. In 1968, the United States troops massacred innocent civilians in the My Lai massacre. After this moment, we lose the moral high ground in the war. Another thing about this war is it's the first war on TV. Prior to the Vietnam War, you got your news on TV. I mean, not TV, on newspapers or the radio or the newsreels and the movies. A lot of people got their updates about the world and the war with all like the movie and with the little previews in the movie theater. Movie theaters were an all-day thing. You had newsreels, you had serials, like stories that would continue to the next movie with cliffhangers. You had cartoons. It was a full day for a nickel. It's pretty cool. Lieutenant Calley and the weeping rifleman named Paul D. Medlow, the same soldier who had fed candy to the children before shooting them, pushed the prisoners into the ditch. There was an order to shoot by Lieutenant Calley. I can't remember the exact words, just something like start firing. Medlow turned to me and said, "Shoot, why don't you shoot?" He was crying. I said, "I can't, I won't." The Lieutenant Calley and Medlow pointed their rifles into the ditch and fired. People were diving on top of each other. Mothers were trying to protect their children. When Army investigators reached the Barren area in November '69, in connection with the there's spell check getting you, the My Lai probe in the United States, they found mass graves at 3 sites, as well as a ditch full of bodies. It was estimated that between 450 and 500 people, most of them women, children, and old men, had been slain and buried here. Yep. In '68, North Vietnamese successfully launched the Tet Offensive. Tet is Vietnamese New Year, and usually it's a party. And it's usually like a lull time, and so pretty smart. they thought, God, what a great time to launch an offensive when they're all celebrating. And that's what they do. And notice that it was coordinated and all over Vietnam. So this wasn't just like troop moving down. Remember, that's not how the Vietnamese fought this war. But there were pockets of resistance, both Viet Minh and Viet Cong, all over South and North Vietnam. And on that day, in a coordinated effort, attacks broke out all over the place. So the enemy in Vietnam is getting stronger, and opposition to the war, again, because it was on TV, because reports were coming home, was stronger than ever before. The Vietnamese people deeply love independence, freedom, and peace, but in the face of the United States aggression, they have risen up, united as one man. You can kill 10 of our men for every one we kill of yours, but even at those odds, you will lose, and we will win. Yeah. President Richard Nixon adopted a policy of Vietnamization, training South Vietnamese troops, allowing for the United States to slowly withdraw. And this becomes a strategy that we invoke time and time again. We go, we train the natives, then we leave. We go, we train the natives, and then we leave. Sometimes it works. And it seems by what we're told that most of the time it doesn't. It's just a matter of changing the color of the bodies. In 1973, the Vietnam War ended and the United States withdrew. The North defeated the South and united the country under communism in 1975. It is still a communist country today. And it's a very successful communist country because remember, communism is an economic system. Needs to be in the top tier, Ben. Not a political system. This is the first time a major Western power loses to a non-industrial, primarily agricultural. This is David and Goliath. It's a loss. It's a big L. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is two of the regions with there were some other ones, but the biggest ones historically decolonizing and becoming independent states. India is a huge economic force today. Vietnam actually is doing pretty well for itself, all things considered. The thing to note is that for the most part, the government was relatively stable, and stable governments allow for progress. India has an advantage of labor, a comparative, almost, what's the word, absolute advantage when it comes to labor. Vietnam geographically is in a nice position. China, Japan, it has resources. So Asia is decolonized briefly. There are more nations that were decolonized, and you'll have a chance to look over some of those. Tomorrow, I will give you Africa's decolonization, and then Friday will be all set. So Thursday, if all goes well, there'll be no notes whatsoever. And Friday, we'll talk about Southwest Asia and the westernization of the Middle East. So until then, thanks. Still waiting for a comment. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.